You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're joined by Carter Lavin to discuss his new book, If You Want to Win, You've Got to Fight. We discuss the mess and practice of politics, how we have more power than we think as advocates, and how we can get the policy results we deserve. Stay with us. Today's podcast is brought to you by our super wonderful, terrific, stupendous Patreon supporters. We appreciate you all keeping this show and Mondays at the Overhead Wire going. To join this merry band of city aficionados and transportation savants, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month could get you some stickers and a handwritten note sent with a cool train station stamp. $10 a month gets you one of our transportation scars. And if you just want to give a single dollar a month, you'll be able to get a podcast feed with 0 outside ads or podcasts. We'll leave information in the show notes about how to do it. We've also got some bonus material up there, and we'll be posting more soon, so check it out if you haven't already. And speaking of scarves, the heavyweight knit bike scarf is back in stock, and of course, it's getting cold out, so you need one. For you, for your friends, your colleagues, or for the anti-bus activists you just want to frustrate. If you want to get one of the bus or bike scarves or the lightweight bike scarf now, visit theoverheadwire.com or support us on Patreon. And if you want to support the show in other ways, you can buy books from the authors we've chatted with on the podcast at the bookshop site, bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire, or find our Cars Are Cholesterol merch at bit.ly/carsarecholesterol. For anything else, including the Town Planning and Practice audiobook, visit theoverheadwire.com and definitely sign up for the almost 20-year-old daily newsletter at theoverheadwire.com, or you can just keep listening and enjoy the show. We appreciate that too. You can find us on Blue Sky, Mastodon, Threads, Instagram, Flickr, YouTube, Substack, and LinkedIn if you want to connect. Usually at the Overhead Wire, but with Flickr, it's Transit Nerds. Some great stuff coming up, so keep on listening and enjoy the show. Carter Lavin, welcome to the Talking Headways podcast.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be here. It's great to be back.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name's Carter Lavin. I'm based in Oakland, California, where I am the co-founder of Transbay Coalition. We are a transit advocacy group in the 9 Bay Area County region. I'm also the author of the book that just came out, If You Want to Win, You've Got to Fight, A Guide to Effective Transportation Advocacy, out from Island Press, which I wrote because there's a lot of people in the world, a lot of your listeners who want the world to be better, who have great ideas about what needs to be done, but are having a hard time winning those changes. And so I wrote a book about here's how to win. I interviewed dozens and dozens of activists from across the country, successful bike and transit and street safety advocates, to get their stories and how they won or how they lost, and condense it down to about 200 pages so that, you know, whether someone's trying to get more rail service or a speed bump, that they say, okay, now I know how to go about doing it. Hopefully we get a lot more people fighting and winning.
That's awesome. I'm wondering when this journey started, though, because when I first met you, it was during the pandemic, and we walked down Sanchez Slow Street a couple of times, and it seemed like you had been doing something else before.
Yeah, the way I think of it is the journey's always been happening, because I've been a climate activist since I was a teenager. You know, I'm my mid-30s now. And when I was a teenager, people say, oh, well, you know, far off in the future, 2025, 2030, California is going to be on fire all the time with climate change. And I was like, well, that's not bad for the people in the future. I'm going to be a person in the future. And so I've always been very aware of this. I had a whole career in the solar industry and the rooftop solar industry because killing coal was an essential part to how we stop climate change. And that entire time in that industry, we made a lot of progress to fight, tooth and nail against a lot of different entities to win. And I kept seeing on the transportation side of things, like us not making the level of progress I'd like to see from a climate perspective and just from a community perspective, that, the bike lanes, the transit service, all that stuff wasn't happening at the speed and scale that I and you and so many of your listeners wanted. And so several years ago, I kicked up this fight to get a bus only lane on the Bay Bridge, which, spoiler alert, we haven't won that yet. But through that experience, which I talk about in the book, in the intro in chapter 1, that helped me get a lot more firmly in the transportation advocacy space, which also helps show me that there is a ton of space. There is, at no point will someone say, hey, we're full up. We have too many transportation advocates, too many transit organizers, like, hey, stick to your lane. Like, no, there is so much need. And so did a bunch of stuff, helped put together Transbay Coalition. And throughout this process, it kept being this how do we learn to be better activists? How do we teach more people to be better activists? Because people would say, hey, that's great about your bus lane fight there. I'm trying to get something done in Santa Clara County. How do I do this? It's like, oh, well, here's how to do this. Here's how to, make a crew and form a coalition, things that chapters 4 and 5 talk about. And, over time, I just kind of got much more into this active process of training activists across the country, which I still do independently through my business. CarterLavin.com has more details on that. And, through the training, through the writing about that, through the presentations, I talked to Island Press, or they reached out and they said, hey, would you like to submit a book proposal? I said, oh my God, it's a book contract. They're like, no, you have to submit a book proposal. So that was a lot of work. Did that. They said yes. Then I wrote a book. And so at the one hand, it's the journey that started about 2-ish years ago when they first reached out. But, I think for me, this journey also really started as a teenager in the suburbs of DC who could bike into the big city, who could bike to Metro and take the Red Line in, who like moved to Philadelphia and had all these experiences and, just recognize like, oh, wait, I want this. And living many years of realizing that, okay, it doesn't matter that we're right. It doesn't matter that like, yes, transit is mathematically the way to move a lot of people from point A to point B, that a protected bike lane is a way of getting a lot of people safely onto bikes. It doesn't matter that we're right. We get our clocks clean all the time. It's like, okay, so given that we know what the answers are, how do we actually win them? Like, how do we get this? And that has been work of study and practice for many years and shows up in the book.
Yeah. And you talk about politics in the book specifically. And I know that I'm probably one of your big targets for, putting politics onto my show because I've gotten a couple emails from you before being like, why don't you ask people to get more involved? Or like, if you give this news item, why don't you tell them how they can change things? And I am interested in this discussion about politics writ large, or small p politics, and like the difference between that and like what's happened in the country as, it pertains to like partisan politics and the mess that is.
Yeah. Chapter 1 of the book is very much for you, Jeff, but also for a lot of other folks
I felt that. I was like, this is needling me specifically.
There's a fun part about writing the book was like, I have a lot of different types of people in mind for all different sections. And there's a certain type of person who comes into transit spaces because they like the stuff. They're like, I want this. This makes a lot of sense. This is easy. This is great. But the process of getting it, they find very distasteful. Mm-hmm. It's like they want the meal, but they hate the cooking. And I get it. It's a very different thing. Like one thing about transit personally that I think really appeals to a lot of people is like, there is a logic and a clarity and it's straight lines and things like that. There's like a kind of a beauty and logic to it. And then you look at the political process and you say, this is like a lot of like big feelings and people and ego and who knows, and oh my God, and this is so scary and this is a big mess and it makes everything worse. And I just want it to all go away. And, there's 3 big things I like to say about this, which I talk about in chapter 1 to really focus on it, because if we don't accept the fact that this is deeply political, if that mess is part of the beautiful thing that we want, that, we can't get the high-speed rail systems that we want just by drawing lines and doing math, like we have to do the messy politics. So like we have to get comfortable with the mess. So there's 3 things I think about as I talk about in chapter 1. One is you're doing this already. Like you are already in the mess. Like you are not separated from that. So like, terrible news, the call is coming from inside the house. Like, so you, Jeff, like this is this is a deeply political thing. You listener right now are engaging in a political act by listening to this. This is, as they would say in the political space, like you are being radicalized. You are learning about politics. This is a political act right now. And so kind of recognizing like, oh, this is happening. This is part of our life. This is not something that like you opt into in October of an election year. Like this is all the time. Politics is all the time, which gets us to 2, which is politics is simply the act of people and society relating to each other. And so all of that's politics. So partisanship, the really noisy, annoying part, red versus blue, all that, that's a segment. That is a small, noisy segment of politics, but everything is politics. You talking to family members at Thanksgiving about how to take the bus in town or any of that stuff, like that is political because you are impacting other people's lives. So recognizing that politics is kind of everywhere. Not only are you in it, but it's everywhere. And then thirdly, yes, it might be noisy and seemingly chaotic, but there is a logic to politics. Like this is something that can be figured out. This is like an ecosystem. And a person might see a jungle or a coral reef or any other ecosystem and think, oh my goodness, I couldn't possibly map this out. It's like, well, except we do. We do this all the time. We say, okay, well, beings, like we're all political beings. They have needs, they have wants, they have things that they are trying to do. They have tools for trying to do it. And that's why this book really lays out, here's all these types of things. And why chapter 1, starts with like, hey, this is political and this is in fact radical. And I don't care if you think this isn't politics. I don't care if you don't want it to be politics. It is. And so you should learn to embrace that, or at least begrudgingly accept it, because then you could start saying, okay, given the thing I want is really political, given that my speed bump requires a political struggle, the question now is, how do I win a political struggle for a speed bump? You say, oh, okay, I need to get elected officials on my side. I need to get community members on my side. I need to talk to people. I need to do all these things. Here's how I organize it. Oh, that's chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that makes it a digestible problem, that when people see this noise of politics and they see the energy and passions and the twists and the turns and all that stuff, and recognizing like, okay, that's an ecosystem. There are kind of maybe not necessarily rules to it, but there are patterns in that, and the patterns are recognizable. And so if you're the kind of person who listens to a podcast like this and, maybe can decipher a Tokyo subway map, like you can also decipher American politics. It is not, I would say it's slightly less complicated than some of the subway maps.
I like that analogy of the ecosystem, because for a long time I've been avoiding the lions, I guess, is what I would say. As a Homo sapien with a hippocampus that tells me certain things, that's kind of where I'm going. And so it's interesting that you mentioned the ecosystem of it all.
Well, and to that point, I think one thing that people get mixed up about when they look at politics, especially coming from like the transit and the bike space, is they see politics as conflict. And like, yes, politics is conflict. There's a lot of part about it, because we are talking about how individuals in society react and interact with each other. Like your speed bump inherently, like literally disrupts the lives of those around you. Like that is, in fact, what you're going for. You are saying people are driving too fast on this road. I would like to disrupt that pattern. That is disruptive. And there's conflict in that, because there's some people who don't want that. But something that's really important for the conflict avoidant among us, myself included.
Are you sure?
Oh yeah, we could talk a lot. Like a great thing about politics is that it's a lot of indirect conflict. Like for someone who's maybe a listener in a small town, they say, my mayor keeps ignoring me. And I've had a training session with the person who said, I tell my mayor all the time about bike stuff, and my mayor ignores me. And they're like, what do I do? Like, what do I say to them? It's like, you don't say anything else to the mayor. You talk to 200 other people in your community, you get them to like the bike, then you get them to talk to the mayor. Like that's you having conflict with that mayor, but you don't have to actually deal with them. And so for people, as you're saying, who are like, ooh, this is noisy and I don't want to deal with that. It's like, great. You don't have to deal with that. Like you could talk to the people on your side and get them to do stuff and get them to call the mayor and have that conversation. And that's what you're doing. And like recognizing that there are so many different roles, and there are definitely roles for the, there are people who are conflict averse. There are people who seek conflict, and we need those people as well. And, kind of recognizing that there's space in all of this for you.
Yeah. I actually, when reading the book, one of the things I wrote down was that like, there's a lot of compassion in this book. There's a lot of understanding that there's differing viewpoints, or you can avoid certain conflicts that you don't want to have. You can try not to mess up somebody else's game, right?
Yeah.
Those types of things. Folks have a lot of power though, and they haven't used it yet, right? So if you're listening to this show, obviously you're into this already, and you have more power maybe than you think.
Yes. A lot more power than you might think. And part of that power comes from expertise. Part of that power comes from the fact that if you're listening to the show, you might know what a bollard is. You might know the difference between a speed hump and a speed cushion. Like there's the Jeff Woods archive that you can now search through. Like that is not even a master's level class. That is a PhD in this stuff. And if you're someone who's just casually listened to the show over the years, or just recently picked up, like you are now head and shoulders above the average person in your community in terms of knowledge of this stuff. And that's wonderful. And that means you have a better insight into where to pick the conflict that you want to have. So for example, bus bulb outs are not exactly a sexy thing. They are the concrete extensions into the road so that the bus stop is not just the flat sidewalk that goes into the road. I'm sure some of your listeners might want to correct me on how I explain that, but that's generally the gist of it. It is both good from a traffic calming perspective, and it's good from a transit facilitation speed perspective, and it's great for accessibility. It makes it easier and more comfortable to ride the bus. Your listeners know that, or some, they can listen to any number of episodes. Jeff, feel free to insert the episode number here of that one per person to learn. And you're like, wow, that's great. It's like, cool. So then take that idea, reading through my book, particularly chapters 2 through 4, help a person say, okay, well, so now I know what we want. I know what the solution is. Now is the easy part. I just need to get other people involved. Okay, so let's write the petition. Let's get the coalition letter. Let's talk to other people about it. Basically, if you want to think about this, as you all, the experts listening, like you have all this theoretical knowledge. You know what works in your community. Now, the next step is to make it practical, apply it, saying, okay, we know that bus bulb outs are good or closing slip lanes are good. Where are the slip lanes in your community? And you're saying, okay, we want to get the slip lane on Main Street closed. Okay, just that one, or are there a couple other ones? Like, let's talk about it. Let's get that data. Let's make that petition. Let's do that coalition, whether let's talk to the community. Let's put this knowledge that you have into action, because no one out there is saying slip lanes now, let's keep this open. Like, there's not a counter protesting movement who's like trying to collect 1,000 signatures around this stuff. Like, one great part about kind of fighting the war on cars, so to speak, is we already don't have so many of the things that we want. Like, we are on the attack. Like, there's no compromised position you need to take because you already don't have the thing. Like, we are trying to remove the slip lanes or close those kind of things or get the protected bike lane or improve the bus service or get the high-speed rail built. And you as an activist, like, what's the mayor going to do? Ignore you? Okay, cool. They're already ignoring you. So just make it harder for them to ignore you. Make it higher consequences for them to ignore you. Like, you're not going to get fired from your random job as long as you don't work for the city and you're doing this. Like, you're not going to get fired from your job for doing this. So do it. The consequences that your county supervisor can enact on you, one, they don't even want to do that. But like, if you're like, let's get thousands of people to sign this petition saying we want to close all slip lanes in my city because they're deadly and they're killing people and it's better to save lives than speed up cars. What? They're going to say no? Congrats. They've already said no to you. So you might as well roll up your sleeves and get fighting, because that's the only way you're going to win anything.
Feels like a little bit, we're still in the low-hanging fruit stage of the fight generally, because, we're so far behind from the 1920s, even before that.
Yeah. And it's frustrating. That can definitely be frustrating, feeling like, wow, there's so much to do. I personally have done a lot of work to get to a place of like deep appreciation of, yes, I've helped lead a lot of efforts over the years to keep Bay Area Rapid Transit, the BART system, alive, and AC Transit, and one of the leads on the regional measure effort in the Bay Area that's needed to keep it alive and get involved if you're in the Bay Area. I didn't create BART. I wasn't around. And so I'm internally grateful for all the people who've done that every sidewalk that you yourself have not built or advocated for, like, that exists because of somebody else. So on one level, yes, there is like so much stuff that hasn't been done. On another level, another layer, so much stuff already has been done. Like, there are beautiful rail lines out there and bus services and things like that. We're actually here to say, great, let's take it further. And that's not going to happen unless we fight for it. That, someone may have not handed you the baton in your community, say, hey, this is the bus advocates from the 80s or 90s, and here you go. And if you're someone who's listening to this and been waiting to be invited into the fight, here's your invitation. Like, go out there, go fight. If you want to win, you got to fight. The book is available in Island Press. I'll help you do it.
Yeah.
You can make those changes. And I think helping people recognize that, like, every improvement's worth doing. And even if it's just, oh, I want there to be a better bike rack in front of my coffee shop. Great. Fight for that. Go push for that. Go talk to the coffee shop owner. Go talk to your city, figure out what that is. Worst case scenario, go install it yourself.
So the best thing about the book is that basically it is kind of a how-to guide on this. Most of the shows that we do and most of the books that we review are like, this is a problem, we need to solve it. But like, how do you solve it? Well, Carter's book tells you how to solve it. And there's a lot of discussions in your book specifically about how you define who makes policy. What's the inside-outside game? What's the process like for making these changes? And I appreciate that you actually laid out like the definition of who a decision maker is and tried to pull the curtain down around what lawmaking actually is and how it works. And so there's all these things that, I mean, I've been in this for 20 years almost now, and there's a lot of things in this that I was like, well, I feel like I knew that kind of on the outside, but I didn't really think about it in the way that the process is you do this, you do this, you do this, boom, you can win.
Yeah. And there's a lot of great books out there that are, as you're saying, like, here's problem, here's solution. And then generally the last chapter is like, get politically involved. And these books are wonderful.
Yeah.
When Driving's Not an Option by Anna Zivart, Better Buses, Better Cities, Killed by a Traffic Engineer. Like, a lot of these books are wonderful. Writing my book, I was like, my book is the sequel to all of those. Or if you've read my book first, it's the prequel. You should check out those other books, because it is so important to understand what these issues are. And, let's talk about our carceral transportation system and how our freeways are overbuilt and the high costs of free parking. Like, that is extremely important. Like, it is important that we are right as a movement. And it is great that it is extremely well documented that we're right. And you can be right all day and get your clocks clean. And I think one of your listeners, and we all know that this happens all the time. People who are wrong win a lot. That's not good. Being right does not automatically guarantee that you'll win. And so we need to learn how to fight more. And so if you want to win, you've got to fight. Picks up where a lot of those books leave off. And my book doesn't tell you what to fight for. Obviously I point at some things like, hey, this is transportation and bikes and street safety and all these kind of good stuff. But you could read this and say, I would like to remove a freeway. Or you could read this and say, how do we get a high-speed rail built? Or how do we get more train service or protect our bus service? Because as we were talking about, this is all part of that ecosystem of action. So, chapter 1 explains, hey, this is political, gets people comfortable. Chapter 2 talks to people about how to even think about a campaign. Like, who are these decision makers? When people say, oh, well, I want better bus service. Like, well, good news. The person in charge of bus service has a name. They're in your community. You could find them. They have a title. They have an email address. They have a phone number. They have people that they listen to. They have people that they care about. We have, let's kind of talk about power mapping, which is not an idea I came up with, but it's bringing it in from other spaces. Which chapter 3 talks about, like, how to understand your context and cultural connections, and slowly but surely helping people build out these campaigns, because everything is a campaign. You could say, well, I want to get bus service returned to my community, or I want the bus stop to be moved 2 blocks over. I don't like the stop being there. I want it to be here. Those are all fights. That's all stuff that takes an effort to make happen. Yeah. And so I think these, like, the transportation reform space is really blessed to have so many wonderful thinkers who've told all these stories, who've done this work to say, here's what the problem is, here's what the solutions are. And I wanted to make sure that this book was not setting agnostic, but it's not the here's how I want a thing, because I don't want someone to think, oh, wow, Carter Lavin helped win $1 billion for transit in California, or any of the other things I thought. Like, it was good for Carter Lavin, but what's that mean for you in Memphis or in, Tallahassee or, Arkansas? It's like, yeah. So the book takes away a lot of, like, the narrative of advocacy, which was a very interesting writing experience of saying, like, we are talking about cooking. Like, instead of saying, here's a meal, saying, so here's how to hold the knife and cut the celery or whatever, cut the vegetable of your choice. So it was a lot of, like, deconstructing the story, because so often, people see the news. They see the news about what's happening. They'll say, oh yeah, I saw that transit funeral that the people in the Bay Area did, and that caused a huge hullabaloo. Okay, so do I do a transit funeral? How do you do a transit funeral? And it's helpful to say, okay, so that actually was, like, the outcropping of this gigantic network of other things. And so, like, hey, chapters 4 through 7 help you understand that, because we aren't taught this. People aren't taught how to make change in our community. Or maybe you got a civics class in high school. But besides that, this isn't information that's just kind of freely given. And when it is, it's generally not given for kind of us transportation nerds. Like, it's generally said, okay, here's, big political movement spaces or other spaces where someone's like, okay, that's great for, like, the healthcare industry, or, pick any number of issues, because people fight on any number of issues. But what about us in the transportation space? And so I really wanted to make, if you want to win, you got to fight, speak very much short through, because
we got to fight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, lest you think that it's just process, there are stories in there because you have to illustrate your points from time to time, right? You have to say what the folks in Illinois did about like the bike lanes on the shoulders and things like that, right? So,
Yeah.
You got to get into a little bit of storytelling because that's what people gravitate to the most part. But it is kind of a kit of parts, right? And also, if you did tell the story of like how Nashville lost their transit election to a bunch of like AV lovers, like, you don't know all of the machinations behind the politics of it. And also, all the people in that story are different from the people in your story, right? Like, and the people in your neighborhood are going to be different from that. And that goes to like the idea of context, right? Like, so you talk about context in the book, and I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about that, because I think it's interesting to think about the cultural, the historical, the political context of things that you're trying to get into.
Yeah. So chapter 3 is all about context and connections and helping people understand their community's context and connections, which, it's a tricky thing writing about because I'm not talking to the reader. Really, it's a lot of like, here's the compass, here's a map, here's how to read a map type of thing. And, and I talk about some stories. There's Jose from Minnesota. He tells this great story about how when it comes to freeway removal, he first starts talking about the whole history of what was there before the freeway, what was the community, what was lost, and how that really helps get people fired up. And so it's like great to tell that story in the book or a little snippet of it. And it's so important to help people understand like your community is different. Every community is different. In the United States, there's some pretty big overarching things that make a lot of our communities similar in terms of car dominance and what our communities tend to spend money on. But a big thing is helping folks understand like what is happening in your community today. Maybe you don't think your mayor cares about it. Okay, well, they're an elected official. How did they do in their last election? Did they win by a lot or by a little? And the answer to that changes a lot about your campaign. It changes a lot about who you go to. Say, well, okay, do they listen to these groups or those groups? Okay, in these groups, is it group A, B, C, or D? Helping people understand this and helping map out their community is so essential, because if you don't understand that, it's very easy to view your opposition or your target as just this huge wall, this big monolith, this undifferentiated mass of no. And it's really helpful to say, okay, well, I'm talking about street safety. Yes, my local chamber of commerce or what have you doesn't really care so much about this. Okay, but maybe the individual businesses do, especially the business right here where they saw a person get hit by a car. I'll talk to that business. And slowly but surely, you kind of build up your supporters this way. And, so chapter 3 really helps people understand how to translate from like bollard speak of, hey, you can't say to someone like, hi, local business owner, you were listening to Overhead Wire recently and they were talking about this. They're like, no, I've never even heard of what you're talking. Or maybe they have, maybe your people are real cool. But like, how do we translate this and put it in terms that people care about? So the second half of chapter 3 really talks about that, of saying, okay, now that you know what are these points of connection, how do you translate? How do you sell to people based on their values? Which is something that was delightful in my interviews with dozens and dozens of advocates across the country to like see what that looks like in their community and how that kind of reflects their community's culture. Because you do have to get specific, even though I think one thing that's interesting about transportation advocacy is high-speed rail is objectively the best way to move people between, 200 and 500 miles or something like that. Like, it doesn't matter what continent you're on. It doesn't matter what hemisphere, like that's true. It's like, okay, cool. But like, what are the people in those different cities in your community? What do they care about? All that matters. And helping understand how to localize your advocacy is really important, because, it's something I've seen before. You can't say to someone like, oh, hey, you should vote for this thing or support this because it's good for everybody. I say, okay, that's good for everybody, but what about me? And, it is our job to say, great point. So, hey, this street that you're crossing, you see how that car is really dangerous right now? If there were this speed bump or this intervention, they drive slower, and so you have a safer time crossing. But, oh, okay, this is good for me crossing here because I go to that coffee shop. I get it. And so chapters 3 particularly focus on like, how do you get to that level of like translating your big values of the vision, or I saw this thing on YouTube and that looked really cool and I want it in my community. It's like, okay, so here's how you translate the wonderful things Ray of City Nerd was saying about what happens in other communities into like, how do you talk about it in your neighborhood? Which goes into chapter 4 of saying, okay, how do you work with your through now? How do you work with these allies and so on from there?
Yeah. I mean, that's the next thing is like, how do you turn people into volunteers? And you kind of lay out the ways that you can do that. People are busy. And so, like, how do you get them to, drop their Netflix habit maybe once a month and come out to a meeting or do some organizing or even just help with the little things that you need help with?
Yeah, that's a huge one. And that's a really constant effort of helping people step into volunteering, helping people step into leadership, because fundamentally, you can't do it all yourself. And even if you could, all that shows an elected official is, wow, Jeff really likes that thing. Jeff's one voter. Like, one thing that is kind of funny about advocacy is there's this big push to efficiency. Like, you want to be really good and efficient at it. At the other hand, like, you do want to create something that takes as many people and absorbs as many people as possible, because having a lot of people on your side is inherently like one of the things we are trying to do. And so, if you're like, oh, well, I can get a robot that'll knock on 1,000 doors, like, yeah, that's not helpful. Like, you need to talk to the people. You need to do the work. Like, doing the work matters. And at the same time, you're like, well, doing the work sounds like work. Like, yeah, it is. And it's
hard.
and it's often not paid at all or paid very poorly. And the hours are long and stressful. And so getting good at asking for help, getting good at structuring the work so that people can help is essential. And it's different. So I have strong opinions about what works for me and my organizing in the Bay Area, especially for this regional transit funding measure, which is super essential to pass. And what's going to work in different communities is different. Like, so some communities, they really do want the like weekly meeting where at the meeting we have the first 30 minutes, we talk about everything. And the next 90 minutes is we do a bunch of work together. And that's just like a regular thing. It's like going to the gym. It's a workout, something. I do a lot of regional organizing. So showing up in person is really hard because fundamentally we're organizing people across like hundreds of miles. And a thing about being a transportation advocate is it tends to be hard to get with your fellow transportation advocate, because the thing that unites you is, hey, isn't it hard to get to the places where we want? And so for me, I think one of the big constants is, making it easy for people to step up, making it meaningful. So it's not just make work, you have to do stuff that has a difference. And as I say in chapter 4, like, don't make it hard for people to say no to volunteer. Make it easy for someone to say yes. So, for example, like an hour ago, I put out a call in a Slack channel saying, like, hey, does everyone here have a stack of flyers who wants a stack of flyers for passing out about the regional measure? And someone's like, oh, wait, I don't have a stack of flyers yet. I was like, okay, do you want us to like send you the PDF so you can print it? Or do you want us to like hand deliver a stack of flyers? Thank you so much for raising your hand. And that's just part of the work of like, okay, breaking the task in. And I think one thing that's so important to think about when you are like newer to being a volunteer leader, like a leader of volunteers, is recognizing the need to like break down the task as much as possible, basic kind of management in that sense, while also creating space. So if someone says, oh yeah, no, I know how to do that, I'm happy to take the ball and run with it, but you don't like continue to baby them. You say, great, here you go. Like, have fun, like go for it. And that's tricky because you never really know. And I think about it like, if someone's saying, hey, it's the holiday season, I'm going to come over, I'll help you cook dinner. How can I help? Some people you could say, great, I need you to make the mashed potatoes. And they'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, I need you to fill that pot with water, put it on there and turn it on, high, and put potatoes in it when it's rained. They're like, okay, that I can do. And so recognizing that different people want different stuff and that it's all volunteer, people can walk away the second they don't feel like it. So like, it is good to be nice because that's just inherently a good thing. And if you're a big old jerk, people aren't going to want to work with you. But like, that's a huge thing. And I think that's just it's important to be nice for a lot of reasons.
I'm wondering how you get to like agreement on things. Like, so for the regional measure, for example, like it's such a large undertaking. It's not just like a speed bump. It's a regional, transportation measure. You have to get approval from the state. You have to do all these things. You have different opinions probably about like what kind of tax that should be. Should it be a sales tax? Should it be a gross receipts tax? Should it be a property tax? Should it be an employment tax or whatever it is? How do you get to those final decisions and go forward?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So a thing about political agreement and disagreement that I think people get tripped up about a lot is that it has a purpose. We're not just talking about transit funding or bus lane location or a speed bump for the sake of it. This is not a theoretical conversation. We're having it for a very practical purpose. And so I find that extremely helpful in terms of saying, okay, well, what are we going to do about that? And so some people might say, for example, hey, I support transit and I want AC Transit and BART and Muni and Caltrain to not die. Okay, how do I help? It's like, great, that's a good conversation. We can talk about that. Here's the flyer, here's the thing, go all this stuff. For some people, when it's like, oh, we're having a disagreement about, well, I want a bike lane, or, I don't care about your bike lane. I don't want to lose these 2 parking spots. Like, okay, well, then we're in disagreement. We could talk about the 2 parking spots. We can talk about, okay, it's 2 of 20 parking spots on the street. It's 2 of 100 parking spots, in a quarter-mile radius. We can have that conversation. And maybe someone still says, yeah, I disagree. You're like, okay, cool. Well, we're not in agreement about that. I'll move on. I'll get other people. And I think one part that's so important in chapters 2 and 3 talk about this a bit is like, it means a different thing if it's some rando on the street who disagrees with you versus a local business owner versus your mayor or your governor. And therefore, what you need to do about that changes. If it's some random person on the street who disagrees with you, it's like, okay, go talk to another person. The elected official, when they're saying, oh, wow, 1,000 people signed this petition, for them, generally, they think, okay, is it a big number of people? Maybe you're in a smaller community and getting just 50 people to sign the thing. We're like, wow, 50 people. And they'll say, okay, what do the general number of people think? And we're like, okay, here's some big number of people they agree. I'm like, okay, that's good to know. Then I'll say, okay, and there's 4 other people who I really care about this stuff. Here's a person I listen to about this stuff. Here's a person I don't want to tick off about this stuff. I'll check in with them. What do they have to say about that? And they're like, okay, great. I formulated an opinion. And so one thing to your original question about politics and disagreement and agreement is recognizing that agreement has a purpose. And so consider, how important is it? And, for example, there's a bike lane effort in my community that I've been pushing for that's, in the process of happening. And, people might say, oh, well, the businesses, they don't like bike lanes because, parking spots and blah, blah, blah. And I went to a custom sofa shop who's on that corridor. I'm just knocking on every door. I might as well go in. I don't think they're going to support this because it's a sofa shop. And I figure trucks or whatever. And they said, oh, no, we all bike to work. The custom sofas get delivered from the factory, whatever. Oh, okay, cool. I'm glad I asked. And I think one thing in our transportation space is a lot of times there are folks who might be so overwhelmed by the enormity of car culture and car dominance that's all around us that the concept of finding allies, it's easy to think, no one agrees with me. So, well, you haven't talked to everyone. So go talk to people. Guess what? You're on the bus. There's other people on the bus with you. Do you want better bus service? There's inherently a bunch of other people on that bus with you who agree. And so going out, finding them, and you're not just agreeing for the sake of saying hey, let's go, I'll go be friends and talk about how much we love the bus, which, be friends, talk about how much you love the bus, but do something with that. And so if someone says, hey, I don't want a flyer, you say, okay, cool. I'm going to pass out flyers. Do you want to help design a flyer? Do you want to do this? Or how would you like to help? And they might say, I don't want to help. Okay, cool. I'm going to go talk to people who do.
That gets me to a question that kind of goes back to earlier in the book when you were talking about you can practice politics anytime or you can practice advocacy anytime, talking to people while you're out clubbing, for example, yes. Right? You can tell people that are crossing a busy street why that busy street might be dangerous to them in their high heels.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's really important, especially for people in the street safety side of things, which I do a lot of advocacy on, is you have a lot more success if you are saying to someone hey, watch out, you should feel a different thing about how you feel now. Hey, that street's dangerous. And here is a thing you can do about it right now. Here is a flyer. Here is the QR code. I'm not asking you to show up at some meeting in 3 days and put something on your calendar and wait for 4 hours. I'm saying, can you add your name to this list? And someone's oh, okay, cool. That's easy. I can do it. Because otherwise, if we're not asking people to do something, if we're not putting that agreement to use, what we're really saying to a person in the street safety world is hey, right now, feel bad. Hey, is your kid at the street corner? You should feel bad right now. You should feel afraid. And it's a lot easier for that person to say, no, I think I want to feel annoyed by you and ignore you rather than feel bad about what's happening in my life right now. Like that doesn't, no, that's not good. That's not what I want. And so saying, hey, just heads up, this thing, the street isn't as safe as it could be. Here's the thing. Can you sign it? We're trying to get it fixed. So like, okay, yeah, I'm open to that idea because you're giving me something to do with it. And I think this comes up a lot of times in all sorts of advocacy spaces where if we're fundamentally just trying to tell a person, hey, feel bad right now without any sort of and do something with it. But no, I don't want to. That seems not fun. And this is, for people who are familiar with like union organizing spaces, they say it's educate, agitate, organize, like agitating people, like disrupting their day, letting them understand like, hey, this could be better. This isn't good. That is very useful if you then organize it. Otherwise, you are just agitating people.
Well, that goes to kind of the other discussion in the book about the inside-outside game. So like being a rabble-rouser versus kind of being the coalition builder of sorts. I wrote good cop, rowdy cop, right? It's not really bad cop. It's just good cop, rowdy cop.
Yeah. And for folks who haven't yet read chapter 6 or who are unfamiliar, really quick crash course on inside game, outside game, and what we're even saying. So in a political decision-making process, there are people who are kind of on the inside of that process. There are people who are making that decision, who have close access to it. So that might be the mayor and the city council and the staff to that and the people that they listen to. And maybe that's a city employee. Maybe that's a close advisor or a personal friend. And then the outside is just literally everybody else. So all of us are somewhere along the spectrum of inside, outside, and it changes depending on the issue. Like it's the holiday season. If you and other people in your household are talking about household decorations, like you are very much on the inside of that decision-making process. I am on the outside of that decision-making process. And your mayor is on the outside of your decision-making process around your household decorations. So it's all the stuff. And so when it comes to talking about getting a new bike lane in town, there are people who maybe have inside access. Maybe they're people in your community who have donated to a mayoral campaign. Maybe they door knock. Maybe they're personal friends. Maybe they're on some bike commission for the city, whatever. There are people who have like inside knowledge of there. And then we have other folks out there who are just the people in the community. And if you're saying, hey, we both want this bike lane to be built, you have different positions that you're coming to this from, which chapter 6 talks about in a lot more detail. Like, you're coming to this from different decision-making process points. You have different levels of access. You have different types of power. And so it's very natural that there might be inherent tension that, the person on the bike advisory committee says, oh yeah, that road is slated to get a bike lane in 6 years. And I know it took us 20 years to even get that slated for 6 years. So I'm not going to light my hair on fire and make a whole ruckus. And the other person who's outside the process says, cool, that's 6 years from now. My kid is 6. I need this now. Like our understanding of what is urgent is really different. And our appreciation of what the amount of work that goes in is very different. And so it's very easy for there to be tension between these like inside advocates and outside advocates. And when they work together, they're extremely powerful. And so chapter 6 really focuses on how to understand these kind of confusing relationships a bit better and how to work at them better, because it is so helpful when a person who has more inside access says to the outsiders, like, hey, by the way, the mayor is showing up at this event pretty soon. That's when you should deliver the 1,000 petition signers. Or when the person on the outside says, hey, we're doing this giant rollout bike ride soon. Happy to pass out a flyer. What's the thing I should be passing out on that flyer? And there's so many other ways that they can work together. And so doing that is really essential. And it's a concept, to be very clear, I'm not the originator of this. This is, something that exists in a lot of other spaces. The civil rights movement does a lot of great stuff on the inside outside game. There's so much that we can learn from. And, and I think also a greater understanding of that, as well as coalitions from chapter 5, like just different groups working together. I find it makes the angst of politics a lot easier to understand, because it helps you go from saying, oh, well, now I'm frustrated that person A in my community who I want to be pushing harder. Oh, I recognize we're on the same team. We're just in different positions. So now the question is not, why are they terrible? It's, how can I help them do better in their position? How do I do better in my position? How do we collaborate more? And maybe the person doesn't want to collaborate with you, and you say, okay, well, now how do I find someone who does collaborate with them and all this stuff? But I find it makes the like fierce ecosystem of politics, a lot less scary, a lot easier to understand. And so I think chapter 6 is going to be a great delight to a lot of folks here who, if you're listening to this, there's a good chance that you might feel very on the outside of your community. You might feel like you're the only one, in Norman, Oklahoma who really cares about this stuff. And if you're a person who listens to this, there's a good chance that you're like, yeah, I work for the Spokane Department of Transportation. I feel like I'm the one true believer here. And I really don't like that the other advocates just keep yelling at me as if I have a magic wand. And it's like, yeah, you can work together. Here's how to work together.
There's some negatives, though, that could possibly come up for this, too. I mean, the organizations that provide cover for insiders when they make wrong decisions and stuff like that, right? And I have a few examples in my head, but I just kind of want to get the general idea out there.
Yeah, and we might be thinking of the same examples that we're not going to name. One classic way that there's tension between kind of these inside advocates and the outside advocates is when inside advocates say, hey, outsiders, I need you to calm down. You're being a little too rowdy, and you are going to overturn the apple cart, or I'm going to lose access to the powers that be because I'm associated. And a lot of times, like, well, tough. That sounds like a you problem, but kind of recognizing that the point of access is to do stuff. And I think one thing that is tricky is kind of syncing up of like, well, what's the game we're playing? Are we playing, I want this one bike lane now? Or are we playing, I want 20 bike lanes in the next 20 years? Like, what's going to happen? How do we prevent overreach? And so it's kind of always a dance, and it's always an opportunity for people to get better at it. And one thing I'm hoping my book, If You Want to Win, You Got to Fight, Guide to Effective Transportation Advocacy, helps people do is it helps provide the shared language so that, maybe you're an outsider and you're really frustrated with your inside ally. You say, hey, here's this book I just read. So I see myself as the outside person. You're the inside person. Can we just like talk about this? It's like, hey, now we're in like couples therapy and talking about our relationship, but like you should talk about your relationship with your advocates, like the relationship that you have with each other, and like figure that out because you are in relations. And so, and they might say, yeah, no, hey, outsiders, you're right. This is our relationship. And you're right. I am telling you to cool it. And here's why. And it just kind of helps them recognize like that they might need to explain that better or point to something. And if you find yourself as an inside advocate frustrated with outsiders who are, overly rowdy, which is generally not the issue our movement has. Our movement is not overly rowdy. Yeah, maybe one day we'll get to be and can write a sequel. But generally speaking, it's like helping them understand who they should yell at. If you say, hey, actually, it's our mayor is fine. It's the council that's terrible. Go yell at them. Or, oh, okay, good. Thank you for letting me know. I will go do this thing. And so having that insight, having those conversations is really important.
Also, just the idea that like somebody can just be petty, right? Like that, like some person in the inside is just like, I'm not working with those people. I don't like them, but you just have to wait for them to leave.
Yeah, I'll read the book. There's a lot in that. But yeah, one thing that is, there are a lot of personalities in the world, and we are part of that as well. And sometimes someone just rubs you the wrong way. And one thing that I think about a lot is transportation politics is a lot about making allies and like comrades and working together in coalitions and all this stuff with people. You're going to make friends. You might find the love of your life through this, but like, you're not here to make friends. You're here to make allies. And those are slightly different things. You could be like, we work together well, and I hate this person's jokes. And that's fine. Really, there's a whole part of this book that I had to take out where I realized I got way too into that chapter 4, how to work together with others. But I know I'm not a perfect person yet. I'm working there, probably won't get there within this lifetime, but like recognizing, okay, given that we're all imperfect beings, how do we collaborate together? That's a big thing. And that's a big part of transportation advocacy. And especially when it feels so urgent, because it is, what we're up against is urgent and big, when it feels so hard. Doing that work, as I talk about in chapter 4, of learning how to work well with your teams is absolutely essential, because there are so many forces that are going to pressure you to have a bad time. And so you have to intentionally work to have a good time.
Does it ever end?
No. And that's a great thing. 1,000 years from now, there's going to be transportation power. 1,000 years from now, as long as there are people, as long as people are gathered in some form of way that makes a society, and as long as those people leave their home and transport themselves, like there will be transportation politics and policies. And I find that greatly liberating as a thought of recognizing that, you, the listener, like Jeff, like you've been doing this for 20 years now. You've created an army of listeners. You have all this people. You have this gigantic backlog that you built. And the fact like, wow, that is just a treasure trove. And then you've done all this work recently to make that something that people can mine through. Like, that's great. And guess what? You got more years ahead of you. Like the future's big. I mean, maybe you're like, no, actually, this is my last podcast. And spoiler alert. But like, that's cool to think like, oh, wow, we get to have long-term plans. And I am very much on team. It's either happening immediately or it never happens. And I'm working on remembering, object permanence. But as a train advocate in your community, you might think, man, I really want that high-speed rail. And you're like, well, that's not going to happen today. It's like, yeah, no, duh, it's not going to happen today. And it might not happen in 10 years. It might take 20 years. Okay, make a 20-year plan. And that might sound a little silly, but it's not going to happen unless people plan for it, unless people make it happen. So you're not going to like wake up and like, oh my God, there's a train there. Like that.
Some people will.
It doesn't, it doesn't naturally happen. It's not a naturally occurring phenomenon. People fight for it and they build it. And so recognizing that, we're allowed to make these plans. We can do this stuff. And these fights daisy chain. We started this thing talking about years ago, 6.5 years ago or something like that. I led a fight that I lost for the bus lane on the Bay Bridge. We don't have it. We still could have it. Like that is a fight that we could pick up tomorrow. And everything we've done in the past, like that builds, and the Trans Bay Coalition that like formed in part because of that fight, all the political all this stuff builds. And recognizing that the stuff never ends. It just, as long as you do it right, you just keep building it and keep building it. And so, yeah, one day you do make yourself the juggernaut of a group locally in your community of saying, okay, you lost that bike lane fight. Okay, guess what? It still needs a bike lane. Keep fighting for it. Maybe you change your tactics. You go a more culture fight, as we talk about in chapter 2, to like shift things around. Like they're not going to install an anti-bike lane. Like even in San Francisco, for example, there used to not be a freeway at the Embarcadero. Then there was a freeway. Then there was a big earthquake, and there was a big talk about should that freeway exist or not. And it came within, I believe, one vote. And now there's not a freeway there. And so there was a part, if you're a anti-freeway activist in San Francisco, you felt the whole world was against you. You totally lost. You lost everything. But time moves on and things change. And they won eventually. And, planning on an earthquake is not the best of plans in the world, but like.
But it was helpful, that earthquake, because there was a number of votes before that Dianne Feinstein presided over that, where people agitated towards getting that highway taken down, and it didn't happen until, the earthquake and more push from the earth.
And it's something that, for right now, with our federal government doing what it's doing, I totally understand. It might not feel like good things are coming our way from the federal government. Like, okay, you can still win fights locally. You can still build power locally. And that means when things shift on the federal level, or when you help shift things on the federal level, you're like, oh, okay, well now our Congress member or our senator is a lot more pro-transit because of all the stuff that you've done, or is a lot more pro-street safety. So that means when there's the next big federal fight around this stuff, that your person is not someone you have to drag kicking and screaming into supporting it. It's someone who like already supports it because of all the great work you did. And so, this is something that I invite folks here who do like thinking in complicated systems, like transit systems, all that stuff. There's a lot of systems-based thinkers. Like politics is part of that. And you could take action by building power and working with others and making coalitions and all the things that, if you want to win, you got to fight talks about. Like, you can make plans that last decades, and that's pretty fun. Maybe a little more depressing. It depends on how you feel that particular day. Is like, is that fun or is that depressing? But I'm on team. That's fun. Like, we already don't have the things. So like, okay, how do we get the high-speed rail built faster? What do we need to do? Because what are they going to do? Build it less fast because you're agitated for it? Like, that's not going to happen.
Well, the book is If You Want to Win, You've Got to Fight, A Guide to Effective Transportation Advocacy. Carter, where can folks find the book to pick it up?
You can get it from Island Press's website, discount code FIGHT to get 20% off. You can ask your local library to pick up a copy if you'd like to get a copy for free. A lot of local libraries have been picking it up already. And then other places, Goodreads, stuff like that. For your international listeners, it's becoming more available internationally, and I think starting February 2026. So keep an eye out for that.
Awesome. And where can folks find you if you wish to be found?
Find me at carterlavin.com if you're looking for training sessions or one-on-ones or workshops for your crews anywhere in the English-speaking world. Happy to hop on a Zoom and talk to folks through the stuff. And if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, please join Trans-Bay Coalition. Let's get you involved in this whole regional measure to save transit and a lot of other things too, because there's a lot of fights that we need to do, and I want to win it, so we got to fight.
It never ends.
Never ends.
Awesome. Well, Carter, thanks for joining us. And also, thanks for the shout out and the acknowledgments. I really appreciate that too.
Yeah, it's, one thing that's very cool about being a transit advocate and organizer is we have this wonderful ecosystem of people like Jeff and all these other great folks, like Ren and Elise Joshi, who help get people really excited. The Cities of Lion, there's all these great folks like Ray, the War on Cars. Like, there's this huge ecosystem where we're like generating all this energy, this great, just like people really excited. And then I get to come in and say, cool. So, hey, did you listen to any of that stuff? Cool. Like, get involved. Let's apply that now. And so, to your kind of a little teasy point earlier on, like, yeah, there was a part where I just like listened to your podcast and like, oh my God, just have such a huge platform and tell people to sign that petition. And I was like, oh wait, no, I'm supposed to do that. I'm supposed to step in and do that work. And so recognizing that we all have our play in our inside outside allyships and our big coalitions. And so thank you for all that you've done to help make the ground a lot more fertile, because 20 years ago, the average person's interest in this stuff was way, way lower. And I appreciate all the work that you've done to help raise consciousness around this.
Well, thank you. And thanks for prodding me. I mean, all jokes aside, I do feel sometimes like we do put out the podcast. We do put out information for folks to use to fight for the things that they care about. But, we could be a little bit more pushy about it sometimes.
Well, I'm here to be the pushy person in that. So folks were like, hey, I listened to that Jeff podcast. I want to apply it into Canton, Michigan or Canton, Ohio. Like, I'm here. Reach out. Let's talk.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Carter.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Headways podcast is a project of the Overhead Wire and appears first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our generous Patreon supporters who support this show and Mondays at the Overhead Wire. You can support the show as always by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. Sign up for our almost 20-year-old newsletter as well by visiting theoverheadwire.com, or check out the show notes for merch or other opportunities to connect. Follow along using your podcatcher of choice, but if you can't find it there, you can always find it at its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways. Hey everybody, thanks for listening this far past the credits. If you're here, I just want to say thank you to all of our generous Patreon supporters, especially those in our $10 Dallas tier and above. I just want to share their names, first names only, of course. But I figured this is long overdue that I let folks know that their support is much appreciative. Obviously, all the tiers are very appreciative, but this group has gone above and beyond over the years, and I really appreciate that. Andrew, Ben, Derek, Gabrielle, Glenn, Greg, James, Jeremy, Jim, Joseph, Catherine, Mao, Marcus, Matthew, Mike, Nicholas, Oliver, Steve, Abraham, Abby, Ed, and Matthew. We really appreciate you, and just can't say enough about how much the support from you all and everybody else on Patreon has really helped us out. So I just wanted to say a quick thank you to everybody. And yeah, so we'll see you next time.